A first-class ticket, a tailored suit, and a world-class reputation meant nothing the moment Dr. Aidan Michael approached the boarding gate. To the airline employee, he wasn't a renowned cardiac surgeon or a respected philanthropist. He was just a black man she decided didn't belong. She denied him his seat, humiliated him in front of a crowd, and dismissed him with a smirk. She, and the powerful CEO who ignored his complaint, thought that was the end of it. They couldn't have been more wrong. What happens when the man they dismissed holds the power to buy their entire world? This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about a reckoning, where one man's quiet dignity ignited a corporate firestorm that brought an entire airline to its knees. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a familiar symphony of chaos. The rhythmic roll of suitcases on linoleum, the distant chime signaling a final boarding call, and the murmur of 100 conversations blended into a white noise that Dr. Aidan Michael had long ago learned to tune out. He was a man who thrived in precision and order, qualities that had made him one of the most sought-after cardiothoracic surgeons in the United States. His life was a meticulously managed calendar of surgeries, consultations, and board meetings for the half-dozen medical tech startups he advised. This trip was a rare indulgence, a direct first-class flight on Apex Air from New York to London for a keynote address at a global medical conference. He wasn't just attending. He was the guest of honor. He'd chosen Apex Air for its reputation for impeccable service, a promise sold in glossy magazine ads featuring smiling, attentive flight attendants and serene, luxurious cabins. Dressed in a bespoke navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and carrying a single, well-worn leather briefcase, Aidan approached Gate B27. The line for first-class passengers was short, but it wasn't moving. The source of the delay was a gate agent with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Carol. Her face was a mask of strained authority. She was arguing with a young couple, her voice a low, sharp razor. "Your carry-ons are half an inch over the limit. You'll have to check them," Carol stated, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "But we flew here with them on your airline just yesterday," the young man protested. "Rules are rules," Carol clipped, pointing a lacquered nail towards the main counter. "Pay the fee and check them, or you won't be boarding." Aidan watched, a familiar sense of unease settling in his stomach. He'd seen this kind of petty power trip before. It was a small-scale tyranny, wielded by those who felt powerless in their own lives. When it was his turn, he offered a polite smile and handed over his passport and first-class ticket. Carol Finch took them without making eye contact. Her fingers tapped a staccato rhythm on her keyboard. The tapping stopped. She looked from her screen to his ticket, then up at his face, her eyes finally meeting his. It was a brief, dismissive scan, but in that fleeting moment, Aidan felt a shift in the atmosphere. The professional mask she wore seemed to tighten. "There seems to be a problem with your seat," she said, her voice flat. "A problem?" Aidan asked, keeping his tone even. "I confirmed it this morning. Seat 2A. The system is showing an equipment change. The seating configuration is different. Your seat is no longer available." She said it with a finality that was meant to end the conversation. Aidan was a seasoned traveler. He knew the script. "That's unfortunate, but I'm sure we can resolve it. What's the alternative you can offer in the first-class cabin?" Carol's lips thinned into a bloodless line. "There are no other seats in first class. We're completely full." She pushed his documents back across the counter, a gesture of dismissal, a flicker of disbelief, then a cold wave of understanding washed over Aidan. He glanced past her at the monitor, displaying the flight's seating chart. He could clearly see 3 other seats in the first-class cabin marked as available. 2A, His seat was green, unassigned. "Your monitor appears to show several available seats," Aidan said calmly, pointing. "4B and 3A are also open. I'd be happy with either of those." Carol's gaze was sharp, her patience visibly dissolving. "Sir, that monitor is not updated in real time. My system is the final word. There are no seats." This was the moment. The pivot from a standard customer service issue to something else. Something uglier. A white passenger behind him, a man in a rumpled suit, huffed impatiently. "Can we get on with it? Some of us have a flight to catch." Carol gave the man an apologetic smile before turning her glare back to Aidan. "Sir, you're holding up the line. I can book you on the next flight, which leaves in 7 hours. It will be an economy." The offer was so insulting it was almost absurd. A 7-hour delay and a downgrade from a first-class ticket I paid over $8,000 for. "That's not an acceptable solution." Her voice dropped, becoming laced with a condescending sweetness that was more insulting than shouting. "I understand you're frustrated, sir. But sometimes these things happen." She looked him up and down again, this time more slowly. The assessment was clear. The expensive suit, the confident posture, they didn't compute with the man she saw standing before her. In her eyes, he was an anomaly, a square peg she was determined to hammer out of its round hole. "Perhaps," she added, a faint smirk playing on her lips, "you'd be more comfortable on a different airline." The public nature of the humiliation was a deliberate choice. Every eye in the line was on him. He could feel their stares, some sympathetic, some annoyed, some simply curious. To react with anger would be to play into a stereotype he'd spent his entire life defying. It would give her the victory. So, he did what he did in the operating room when a sudden complication arose. He slowed his breathing, focused on the facts, and removed the emotion. "Carol," he said, reading her name tag with deliberate precision. "I would like to speak with your supervisor, a station manager." Her smirk widened. "Mr. Davies is busy handling a more urgent matter. I am the lead agent for this flight. My decision is final." It was a lie, and they both knew it. There was no urgent matter. The only urgency was her desire to see him gone. Just then, a white family of 4 bustled to the front, flustered and late. Carol's entire demeanor changed. Her face softened into a beacon of customer service charm. "Don't you worry, Henderson family," she cooed. "We'll get you all sorted." She tapped furiously at her keyboard. "Okay, I've managed to move some things around. I've got you 4 seats together. One of them is an upgrade to first class for you, Mr. Henderson. On the house. For your trouble." She printed their tickets and handed them over, completely ignoring Aidan, who stood there, passport in hand, rendered invisible. Mr. Henderson was assigned seat 2A. Aidan's seat. The blood drained from Aidan's face. It was no longer a suspicion. It was a blatant, undeniable act of discrimination, executed with a smug smile. He had been erased, replaced, deemed unworthy of the very seat he had purchased. He didn't say another word. He simply stepped back from the counter, his mind a maelstrom of cold, quiet fury. He took out his phone and, with a steady hand, began to record. He panned across the gate, the flight number, the smiling Henderson family settling into the waiting area, and then zoomed in on Carol, who was now laughing with a colleague, oblivious or, more likely, indifferent to the profound wound she had just inflicted. He then turned the camera on himself. His face was calm, his voice low and measured. "My name is Dr. Aidan Michael," he began. "The time is 2:17 p.m. on May 12th. I am at JFK Terminal 4, Gate B27, for Apex Air Flight 88 to London Heathrow. I have a confirmed, paid-for, first-class ticket for seat 2A. I have just been denied boarding by the lead gate agent, Carol Finch, who claimed the flight was full, only to give my exact seat away as a complimentary upgrade to another passenger moments later. Apex Air has deemed me unworthy to fly in their premium cabin." He stopped recording. The humiliation was a burning coal in his chest, but his mind was already moving past it, to the next step, and the one after that. Carol Finch had made a mistake. She thought she was dismissing a man. She had no idea she had just declared war on an institution. The flight to London left without him. Aidan didn't wait for the 7-hour economy option. He walked away from gate B27, the echoes of the boarding announcement mocking his retreat. In the sterile quiet of the Apex Air VIP lounge, which his first-class ticket still granted him access to, in a bitter twist of irony, he didn't call customer service to rage. He didn't post the video to social media to seek a mob's justice. His anger was a different kind of energy. It was a cold fusion, a powerful, contained reaction that fueled not impulse, but strategy. He made 3 calls. The first was to his personal assistant, a hyper-efficient young woman named Clara. "Clara, I've been bumped from Flight 88. Cancel my speaking engagement in London. Send my deepest apologies to the conference organizers. Cite an unforeseen and intractable scheduling conflict with the airline. Then book me a seat on the next flight back to Chicago. Any airline but Apex. And clear my surgical schedule for the rest of the week." The second call was to Julian Hayes, the senior partner at his law firm, a man who had navigated Aidan through the complex legalities of his medical startups. "Julian," Aidan said, his voice devoid of heat, "I need you to draft a letter. It will detail a flagrant incident of racial discrimination I just experienced with Apex Air. I have video. Don't threaten a lawsuit. Not yet. Frame it as a formal complaint seeking an internal investigation and a formal, written apology from the CEO. Send it directly to the office of Richard Sterling." Richard Sterling, the CEO of Apex Air. A man known for his ruthless cost-cutting and a public persona built on platitudes about customer-first values. The third and most important call was to Isabel "Izzy" Chen. Izzy was a legend in certain circles on Wall Street. A petite, unassuming woman in her late 30s, she ran a boutique private equity firm that specialized in strategic acquisitions. She was a shark who looked like a dolphin. Aidan had been one of her first major investors, and their professional relationship had blossomed into a deep, trusted friendship. She managed a significant portion of his personal wealth. "Izzy," he said, "I need you to do a deep dive for me. Apex Air. Ticker symbol APX. I want to know everything. Their debt load, their major shareholders, their board composition, their vulnerabilities. I want to see the anatomy of this company, down to the last bone." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then Izzy's sharp, inquisitive voice. "Aidan? What happened? You sound cold." "I was just reminded of my market value, Izzy, and I've decided I want to adjust it." Within 48 hours, Aidan was back in his Chicago office, a minimalist space overlooking Lake Michigan. The letter from Julian's firm was sent. The response from Apex Air arrived a week later. It wasn't the formal apology from the CEO he had requested. It was a templated email from a mid-level customer relations manager. "Dear Dr. Michael," it read, "we are sorry to hear that your travel experience did not meet your expectations. Operational changes can sometimes result in seating reassignments. We value your business, and as a gesture of goodwill, we would like to offer you a $300 travel voucher for your next flight with Apex Air." The email concluded with, "We have reviewed the matter and consider this case closed." Aidan stared at the words, "case closed." The insult was breathtaking in its corporate indifference. They hadn't investigated. They hadn't spoken to Carol Finch. They had simply run his name through an algorithm and spit out a lowball settlement offer. They hadn't seen a respected surgeon, a man of significant means and influence. They had seen a complaint statistic, a box to be checked, a problem to be made to disappear for the price of a domestic flight. That was when the strategy shifted. This was no longer about an apology. An apology wouldn't fix the systemic rot that allowed a Carol Finch to operate with impunity, nor would it touch the callous corporate culture that Richard Sterling had built, a culture that shielded itself with automated emails and travel vouchers. He forwarded the email to Izzy with a single line. They consider the case closed. Let's start the autopsy. Izzy's report landed on his desk 2 days later. It was a 50-page masterpiece of financial intelligence. Apex Air was, as she put it, a bloated giant with brittle bones. The company was carrying a massive amount of debt from a recent, poorly timed fleet expansion. Fuel costs were rising, and their profit margins were thinner than a razor's edge. Their stock, APX, had been underperforming for 3 consecutive quarters. More importantly, shareholder morale was low. The institutional investors, pension funds and mutual funds like Vanguard and BlackRock, were getting restless, concerned about Richard Sterling's leadership and his focus on short-term profits over long-term stability. Their ownership is diluted, Izzy explained over a video call, pointing to a complex chart. There's no single dominant shareholder. The top 10 institutional investors own about 45% of the company, but their stakes are fragmented. The board is mostly loyal to Sterling, but that loyalty is tied to the stock price. If the price continues to fall, they'll get nervous. Aidan leaned forward, his focus absolute. What's the float? How much of the stock is actively traded and available to the public? About 55%. Izzy replied, a slow smile spreading across her face as she realized where his mind was going. A significant portion. Aidan, what are you thinking? I'm thinking, Aidan said slowly, that a $300 voucher feels a little light. I'm thinking about a hostile takeover. Izzy blinked. A hostile takeover of a major airline? Aidan, that's not buying a few shares. That's billions. With a B. It's a war, the kind of thing Carl Icahn does. I'm not talking about buying the whole company overnight, he clarified. I'm talking about becoming the biggest voice in the room. What would it take to acquire a significant, controlling interest? Enough to get a seat on the board. Enough to make Richard Sterling listen. Izzy was silent for a full minute, her fingers flying across her keyboard, running models. The idea was audacious, almost insane. But Aidan Michael wasn't an impulsive man. He was a surgeon who would spend 12 hours meticulously repairing a human heart. He understood complexity, patience, and the critical importance of leverage. To become the single largest individual shareholder, Izzy finally said, her voice a mix of awe and trepidation, you'd need to acquire at least a 5% stake. That would trigger a mandatory SEC disclosure. At the current share price, you're looking at an initial investment of roughly $400 million. She paused, letting the number hang in the air. And we'd have to do it quietly, through shell corporations and dark pools to avoid driving up the price as we buy. It would take months. It would be a massive financial risk. If it goes wrong, you could lose a fortune. Aidan looked out the window at the vast, calm expanse of the lake. He thought of the look on Carol Finch's face, that smug, dismissive smirk. He thought of the anonymous, insulting email from a corporation that believed it was untouchable. He thought of the countless others who had likely faced the same humiliation, but lacked the resources to fight back. This wasn't about the money. He had more than he could ever spend. This was about principle. It was about taking a system that was designed to crush the individual and turning it back on itself. "Izzy," he said, his voice as steady as a surgeon's hand, "let's open an account, and let's call it the B27 Fund." The acquisition began not with a bang, but with a whisper. Over the next 6 months, the B27 Fund became a ghost in the financial markets, operating through a web of LLCs with innocuous names like Kensington Capital Partners and Northbridge Holdings. Izzy Chen executed a brilliant and subtle campaign of accumulation. She bought in small, irregular blocks, never enough to trigger algorithmic alarms. She used dark pools, private exchanges hidden from public view, to purchase larger tranches of shares without affecting the stock's market price. Every transaction was a surgical cut, precise and untraceable to a single source. Aidan, in turn, began quietly liquidating less strategic assets, real estate holdings, stakes in non-essential tech ventures, funneling the capital into the B27 Fund. It was a massive, high-stakes reallocation of his personal fortune, a bet made not on financial return, but on moral vindication. While Izzy was the architect of the financial siege, Aidan became its strategist. He immersed himself in the world of Apex Air. He read every quarterly report, every analyst call transcript, every industry white paper. He learned the names of every board member, their professional histories, their allegiances, and most importantly, their pressure points. He discovered that Richard Sterling's iron grip on the company was showing cracks. Sterling was an old-school CEO, a charismatic bully who had risen through the ranks in the 1990s. He viewed customer service not as a cornerstone of the business, but as a cost center to be minimized. His mantra was shareholder value, a phrase he used to justify everything from laying off thousands of baggage handlers to cutting back on aircraft cleaning services. The results were predictable. Apex Air's on-time performance was slipping. Customer complaints were at an all-time high. Their once sterling reputation was becoming tarnished. Yet the board remained loyal, captivated by the short-term profits Sterling squeezed from the company's assets. As the B27 Fund stake grew, 2%, 3%, 4%, subtle tremors began to be felt within Apex Air's corporate headquarters in Atlanta. Institutional investors, the big pension and mutual funds, started receiving anonymous but impeccably researched dossiers. These reports, compiled by a private intelligence firm hired by Aidan, highlighted the growing operational rot within Apex. They detailed rising customer dissatisfaction metrics, safety inspection reports that were good but not great, and a worrying trend of experienced pilots leaving for rival airlines. The dossiers never suggested a course of action. They simply presented the data, planting seeds of doubt about Sterling's leadership. "Is the current strategy sustainable?" one report concluded. "Or is Apex Air flying on borrowed time and goodwill?" Meanwhile, in the public sphere, a different kind of pressure was being applied. Aidan used his philanthropic connections to fund a new, independent study on consumer equity in the travel industry, conducted by a respected university. The study, published to significant media attention, found that passengers of color were disproportionately affected by involuntary boarding denials, downgrades, and other service failures across the industry. Apex Air was singled out as one of the worst offenders. Richard Sterling, in a disastrous interview on CNBC, dismissed the study as academic nonsense funded by activist agendas. "We at Apex Air do not see color," he declared with a confident smile. "We see customers, and we serve all of our customers equally." It was the exact kind of arrogant, tone-deaf response Aidan had predicted. Sterling was too proud to see the storm gathering on the horizon. He saw each issue in isolation. A few disgruntled investors, a boring academic study, a slight dip in the stock price. He was incapable of seeing the orchestrated campaign unfolding around him. the first person to notice something was truly wrong was a junior analyst in Apex's investor relations department. He was tasked with tracking major stock movements. For weeks, he'd been flagging a series of coordinated, stealthy purchases from several seemingly unrelated holding companies. Individually, they were insignificant. But when he aggregated them, a terrifying picture emerged. A single, unknown entity was systematically buying up their stock. It was a shark, circling their boat just beneath the surface. He brought his findings to his boss, who brought them to the CFO. The CFO, a sterling loyalist named Gerald Vance, convened a panicked, closed-door meeting with the CEO. "Richard, we have a problem," Gerald said, his face pale. "Someone is accumulating a massive position in our stock. We estimate they're nearing the 5% threshold. We don't know who it is, but this is a classic, hostile takeover playbook." Richard Sterling leaned back in his leather throne of a chair, a portrait of unconcerned power. "A hostile takeover? Gerald, don't be so dramatic. It's probably just a hedge fund looking to make a quick buck. They'll make some noise, demand a buyback, and go away. Let them. We'll weather it." "I don't think so, Richard," Gerald insisted. "The buying is too patient, too disciplined. This isn't a smash and grab. This feels personal. They're not trying to drive the price up. They're trying to acquire a position of power without us knowing. By the time we find out who they are, it might be too late." Sterling waved a dismissive hand. "Find out who it is. Use our contacts at Goldman Sachs, at Morgan Stanley. Lean on them. I want a name. In the meantime, prepare a poison pill defense, just in case. But I'm telling you, you're spooked over nothing." But the Wall Street banks had no answers. Izzy's web of shell companies was a labyrinth. The ghost in the machine remained a ghost. The tipping point came on a rainy Tuesday in October. Izzy called Aidan, her voice tight with excitement. "We're there," she said. "As of 10 minutes ago, Kensington Capital Partners filed a Schedule 13G with the SEC. We've officially crossed the 5% threshold." The filing was a legal requirement. The ghost now had to reveal itself. But it wouldn't reveal Aidan Michael. It would reveal the name of a holding company. "What happens now?" Aidan asked. "Now?" Izzy replied. "The fox is in the henhouse. The filing will be public by morning. Sterling will know the name of the entity, but he still won't know who is behind it. He'll scramble. The board will panic, and we will remain silent. We let the pressure build. The annual shareholder meeting is in 6 weeks. That's when we make our move." Aidan looked at the APX stock ticker on his screen. It was down another 0.5%. A ship taking on water, captained by a man who refused to believe it was sinking. The next morning, the name Kensington Capital Partners exploded in the financial news. Analysts scrambled to figure out who was behind the mysterious firm that now owned 5.3% of Apex Air, making it the airline's single largest shareholder. Richard Sterling, sitting in his penthouse office, felt a genuine pang of fear for the first time in his career. The ghost had a name, but it still didn't have a face, and the unknown was far more terrifying than any enemy he had ever faced before. The revelation that an unknown entity, called Kensington Capital Partners, had become Apex Air's largest shareholder, sent a shockwave through the company's Atlanta headquarters. Richard Sterling, for all his bluster, was rattled. He ordered his team to dig, to use every resource at their disposal, to unmask the person or people behind the firm. But Izzy Chen had built an impenetrable fortress of legal and financial abstraction. Kensington was a Delaware corporation, which itself was owned by a trust registered in the Cayman Islands. It was a dead end. Sterling was a man who understood power through the lens of personal relationships and brute force. He couldn't fight an enemy he couldn't see. His frustration festered, turning into a paranoid obsession. He saw Kensington's shadow in every stock fluctuation, in every negative news article. His first instinct was to go on the offensive. He scheduled a series of fawning interviews with friendly financial news outlets, projecting an image of calm, unshakable leadership. "We welcome any investor who believes in the long-term vision of Apex Air," he said smoothly to a Fox business anchor. "Our fundamentals are strong, our strategy is sound, and we are poised for unprecedented growth." Behind the scenes, however, he was desperately trying to shore up his defenses. He called each board member personally, reminding them of the fat dividend checks and the soaring stock price he had delivered in his first 5 years as CEO. He assured them this Kensington situation was a minor distraction, a bit of market theatrics that he had under control. Most of them, comfortable and complacent, were happy to believe him. It was during this period of frantic activity that a file, long buried, resurfaced. As part of a quarterly review of outstanding legal complaints and customer relations issues, a junior legal aide flagged the case of Michael Aden. It was unusual because of the complainant's profile, a high net worth individual, a prominent surgeon, and the direct, non-litigious letter sent by a top-tier law firm. The file included the initial complaint, the video Aden had taken, and the insulting $300 voucher response. The legal aide, a conscientious young woman named Sarah, thought it was a significant unforced error. Such a high-profile individual should have been handled with more care. She brought the file to the general counsel. "This is the kind of thing that becomes a PR nightmare," she argued. "Maybe we should reach out, offer a real apology before he decides to sue or go public." The general counsel, a man whose primary function was to protect Richard Sterling, brought the file to the CEO. He laid out the documents on Sterling's expansive mahogany desk. Sterling glanced at the name. Dr. Aden Michael. It meant nothing to him. He read the summary of the incident at Gate B27. His eyes scanned the transcript of Carol Finch's interaction. He watched the 30-second video Aden had recorded. He saw a well-dressed black man speaking calmly into his phone. He saw a gate agent, Carol Finch, whom he vaguely recognized from a long-service employee award ceremony. He saw a routine airport dispute. His mind, already consumed by the billion-dollar threat of Kensington Capital, had no capacity for this seemingly minor issue. "So, we bumped a guy from a flight," Sterling said with a shrug, tossing the file back across the desk. "It happens 1,000 times a day. We offered him a voucher. He didn't take it. What's the problem?" "The problem, Richard," the general counsel explained patiently, "is who he is. He's not just some random passenger. He's influential in the medical community, sits on several boards. This isn't the guy you want to alienate. And his complaint isn't about being bumped. It's a formal accusation of racial discrimination." Sterling scoffed, a deep, dismissive sound. "Oh, please. Everyone who doesn't get their way these days screams discrimination. It's the go-to play. Did we do an internal review?" "Customer Relations sent a query to the JFK station manager," the lawyer replied. The manager, a Mr. Davis, asked the gate agent, Carol Finch, for her side of the story. She claimed the passenger was aggressive and disruptive, and that the seating change was due to a last-minute equipment swap. It became a "he said, she said." So we sent the standard goodwill voucher and closed it. "There you have it," Sterling declared, standing up to signal the end of the meeting. "A disruptive passenger and a by-the-book response from our staff. We stand by our employee. Don't waste any more of my time with this. I've got a multi-billion-dollar shark circling my company, and you're bringing me a minnow." It was a fatal miscalculation. Sterling saw the world as a series of big threats and small annoyances. The fight with Kensington Capital was the big threat. Dr. Aidan Michael was the small annoyance. He failed to entertain, even for a second, the possibility that the minnow and the shark were one and the same. His own biases blinded him. In his mind, the person capable of orchestrating a sophisticated, multi-hundred-million-dollar corporate raid looked like Carly Khan or Bill Ackman. He did not look like the man in the video. Unbeknownst to Sterling, Izzy Chen's team had already flagged the internal inquiry into Aidan's complaint. They had sources, digital and human, everywhere. They knew that Sterling himself had seen the file and had personally dismissed it. He held the entire story in his hands and threw it in the trash, Izzy told Aidan, a note of disbelief in her voice. "He knows your name, he knows what happened, and he decided you are irrelevant. His arrogance is a gift, Aidan. It's the vulnerability we've been waiting for." Aidan felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Sterling hadn't just ignored a complaint, he had actively endorsed the discrimination. He had co-signed Carol Finch's actions and the company's insulting response. He had personally validated the very injustice that had set this entire chain of events in motion. The plan now moved into its final phase. With the shareholder meeting just 2 weeks away, Izzy's team began a quiet campaign of outreach. They contacted the representatives of the other major institutional investors, the pension funds and asset managers. They didn't reveal who was behind Kensington, but they presented themselves as a new, powerful shareholder with a clear vision. Richard Sterling's leadership has put this company on a path to decline, Kensington's official proxy statement read. He has prioritized short-term gains at the expense of long-term brand equity, operational excellence, and customer loyalty. His dismissive attitude towards legitimate consumer concerns is not just a moral failing, it is a catastrophic business liability. It is time for a change in leadership. It is time for a new vision for Apex Air. The message resonated with the already restless investors. They were tired of Sterling's excuses and his declining results. Kensington wasn't just a hostile entity anymore. It was presenting itself as a savior. Whispers turned into serious discussions in boardrooms across the country. A proxy battle was brewing, a vote to oust the current board and, with it, the CIO. Richard Sterling felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. The loyalty he had taken for granted was evaporating. The board members who had once praised him now met his calls with non-committal murmurs. The shark was no longer circling. It was moving in for the kill, and he still had no idea who was guiding it. The Apex Air annual shareholder meeting was held in the grand ballroom of the Atlanta Ritz-Carlton. The room was a sea of dark suits and nervous energy. The air, usually thick with corporate self-congratulation, was instead charged with the tension of an impending coup. On the dais sat Richard Sterling and the board of directors, their faces arranged in masks of forced confidence. Sterling began the meeting with his usual slick presentation, full of cherry-picked statistics and optimistic projections. He spoke of navigating headwinds and unlocking future value. But his words rang hollow. Everyone in the room knew this was not about quarterly earnings. It was a referendum on his leadership. The main event was the vote on the board slate proposed by the dissident shareholder, Kensington Capital Partners. "And now," Sterling said, his voice tight, "we open the floor for comments from our shareholders before the vote. As is customary, we will begin with our largest stakeholders. We recognize the representative from Kensington Capital Partners." A hush fell over the ballroom. Heads craned towards the aisles, searching for the mysterious figure who had held the company hostage for the past 2 months. Who was it? A Wall Street raider? A rival airline's proxy? A side door near the stage opened, and a man walked out, not from the audience, but from the back. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit, and moved with an aura of unshakable calm. It was Dr. Aidan Michael. He walked past the front row and up the small set of stairs to the podium, carrying a simple, leather-bound folder. A ripple of confusion went through the board members on the dais. Richard Sterling stared, his brow furrowed. He recognized the face, but couldn't place it. It was a face from a file, an annoyance from months ago, a minnow. It didn't make sense. Aidan reached the podium and adjusted the microphone. His eyes swept across the room before finally landing on Richard Sterling. "Good morning," he began, his voice calm, clear, and amplified throughout the silent ballroom. "My name is Dr. Aidan Michael. For those of you who have been speculating, I am the founder and sole principal of Kensington Capital Partners." A collective gasp went through the room. On the dais, Sterling's face went from confusion to disbelief to a dawning, sickening horror. His blood ran cold. The minnow wasn't a minnow. The minnow was the shark. 6 months ago, Aidan continued, his voice never rising, yet commanding the absolute attention of every person in the room. I was not a shareholder. I was a customer. A first-class passenger for your Flight 88 to London, standing at Gate B27 at JFK. I was a customer who was publicly humiliated, denied the seat I paid for, and dismissed based on the arbitrary and prejudiced judgment of one of your employees. He paused, letting the words sink in. He could see the color draining from Sterling's face. I did what any customer might do. I filed a formal complaint. I didn't ask for money. I didn't threaten a lawsuit. I asked for a simple acknowledgement and an apology. In response, your corporate machine, the culture that you, Mr. Sterling, have meticulously built, offered me a $300 voucher and considered the case closed. He opened the folder and slid a piece of paper out. It was a copy of the email. This is the value your company assigned to my dignity. $300. So, I decided to conduct my own valuation. I started buying shares. Just a few at first. Then more. My case may have been closed by your customer service department, but my interest in your company was just beginning. I learned that the dismissive culture that I experienced at Gate B27 wasn't an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a disease that starts at the top. He turned his gaze directly to Sterling, who looked as if he had been punched. You have fostered a culture of contempt, Mr. Sterling. Contempt for your customers, whom you see as data points on a spreadsheet. Contempt for your employees, whom you underpay and overwork. And contempt for your shareholders, to whom you feed a steady diet of empty promises while the foundation of this company crumbles. You had the opportunity to address my specific complaint. My file, I am told, even crossed your desk. You saw my face, you knew my name, and you dismissed me as irrelevant. A minnow, I believe was the term. The room was deathly quiet. This was no longer a proxy battle. It was a public execution. You were so busy looking for a shark in the water, you never thought that the man you threw overboard might just learn to breathe underwater. You never considered that the minnow might have the resources, the discipline, and the conviction to buy the entire ocean. Aidan then addressed the rest of the shareholders. This is not about revenge. This is about restoration. This company, Apex Air, has a proud history and thousands of dedicated employees. It deserves leadership that respects its customers, empowers its staff, and builds for the long term, not for the next quarter's earnings call. The slate of new board directors proposed by Kensington Capital is comprised of industry experts, technology innovators, and leaders in customer experience. They believe in a new vision for Apex, a vision of accountability, integrity, and excellence. He looked back at Sterling one last time. Your tenure is over, Mr. Sterling. You didn't just lose a customer on May 12th. You lost an airline. Aidan finished speaking and walked back to his seat in the front row, a seat he now owned 1,000 times over. The room was stunned into silence for a moment, and then a slow, spreading round of applause began. It wasn't just from his allies. It was from investors who finally understood the depth of the rot Sterling had cultivated. The vote was a mere formality. The preliminary tally, displayed on the large screens, was a landslide. Kensington's proposed board slate was elected with over 70% of the vote. Richard Sterling and his cronies were out. Sterling sat motionless, his face ashen. He had been publicly, surgically, and comprehensively dismantled. He wasn't just fired, he was exposed. The man he had dismissed as nothing had become his undoing. The first motion of the new board, as communicated by its newly elected chairman, was to accept Richard Sterling's immediate resignation and to initiate a full, independent audit of the company's operational and customer service protocols. The second, unstated motion was already underway. A message was being relayed to the JFK station manager. It had two names on it, Carol Finch and Mr. Davies, and a simple instruction: report to HR immediately. The fallout from the shareholder meeting was swift and brutal. For Richard Sterling, it was a career apocalypse. The story of his ousting was not a dry business brief. It was a sensational drama of hubris and karma that played out on the front pages of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. The minnow and the shark became a business school case study on the perils of corporate arrogance. Stripped of his CEO title, Sterling was also stripped of his power and influence. The friends who had once eagerly taken his calls now screened them. The board he had controlled had turned on him. His golden parachute, while substantial, was tarnished by the public humiliation. Worse, the independent audit initiated by the new board, led by a ruthless forensic accounting firm, began to uncover a pattern of financial malfeasance. Sterling had been using company funds for lavish personal expenses, hidden within vaguely titled marketing and consulting budgets. The SEC launched a formal investigation. His professional life was over, and his personal freedom was now in jeopardy. For Carol Finch, the gate agent from B-27, the reckoning was more intimate, but no less devastating. She was called into the office of the JFK station manager, her former protector, Mr. Davies. But Davies wasn't there to protect her. He was there to save himself, sitting next to a stone-faced HR executive from corporate. They played the video from Aidan's phone. They showed her the paper trail, Aidan's confirmed ticket, the seating chart showing available seats, and the record of her giving seat 2A away to another passenger. They presented her with her official statement, where she had lied about Aidan being aggressive and disruptive. "Carol," the HR executive said, her voice devoid of any warmth, "your actions on May 12th were a direct violation of company policy, federal anti-discrimination laws, and our corporate code of conduct. Furthermore, your falsified report to your manager constitutes gross misconduct." Carol stammered, her usual veneer of authority cracking to reveal a desperate panic. "I was just following procedure. The system, it was a stressful day." "The day you chose to discriminate against Dr. Aidan Michael has now cost this company its CEO, its board, and hundreds of millions of dollars in market value," the executive stated coldly. "Your employment with Apex Air is terminated, effective immediately. Please collect your personal belongings, and you will be escorted from the premises." Mr. Davies, the station manager who had rubber-stamped her lie, was fired an hour later for his failure of oversight and for his role in the subsequent cover-up. Carol Finch left JFK that day not with a smirk, but with a cardboard box containing a coffee mug and a few framed photos. Her name, linked to the viral story, became toxic. No other airline would hire her. She ended up working in a call center for a home security company, a job where she had no authority, no discretion, and no power to exercise her prejudices. Every day was a reminder of the moment she chose to belittle the wrong man. But Aiden Michael's goal was not simply to punish the guilty. Vengeance was a byproduct, not the mission. The mission was change. His first act as the company's new power broker was to install a new CEO. He didn't take the role himself. He was a surgeon, not an airline executive. Instead, he headhunted Anjali Sharma, a brilliant and respected COO from a rival airline known for her revolutionary approach to customer experience and employee relations. Sharma was a woman of color, a visionary leader who understood that a company's greatest asset was its reputation. Together, Aiden and Anjali started the painstaking process of rebuilding Apex Air from the inside out. They called it the Apex Ascent Initiative. It began with a top-to-bottom overhaul of customer service training. The new program, developed with leading diversity and inclusion consultants, was mandatory for every single employee, from the baggage handlers to the senior pilots. It focused on empathy, de-escalation, and unconscious bias. Role-playing scenarios, including the exact situation Aiden had faced, were used to train employees on how to handle difficult situations with respect and dignity. They invested heavily in technology, creating a transparent, real-time app that showed customers exactly why a delay was happening or how a seating change was processed. The goal was to eliminate the information asymmetry that allowed employees like Carol Finch to wield arbitrary power. They also focused on the employees. Wages were increased, benefits were improved, an anonymous whistleblower hotline was established, empowering employees to report misconduct without fear of retribution. Anjali Sharma spent her first 3 months on the job not in the boardroom, but on the front lines, working shifts with gate agents, talking to baggage handlers, and flying with flight crews to understand their challenges. The changes were expensive and difficult. The stock price dipped initially as Wall Street reacted to the increased spending. Financial pundits called Aiden a socially minded amateur who was going to run the company into the ground. But then, something remarkable began to happen. Employee morale, once abysmal, started to soar. Apex's on-time performance began to tick upwards. Customer complaints dropped precipitously. Positive stories began appearing on social media, tales of gate agents going above and beyond, of flight attendants showing extraordinary kindness. The public, who had followed the dramatic takeover with fascination, began to see Apex Air not as the airline of Carol Finch and Richard Sterling, but as the airline of Aiden Michael and Anjali Sharma. It became the airline of the second chance. People started choosing to fly Apex, not because it was the cheapest, but because they believed in what the company now stood for. Within 18 months, the fruits of their labor were undeniable. Apex Air was ranked #1 in customer satisfaction for the first time in its history. Fueled by customer loyalty, profits began to rebound, then to exceed previous records. The stock price followed, climbing to heights it had never seen under Richard Sterling's leadership. The pundits who had mocked Aiden were forced to eat their words. He hadn't been a naive amateur. He had been a visionary who understood a fundamental truth Sterling had forgotten. A company's soul is its greatest asset. 2 years after the hostile takeover, Dr. Aiden Michael was once again at JFK's Terminal 4, standing before Gate B27. The branding was different. Apex Air's logo was now a sleeker, more modern design, and the tagline underneath read, "Excellence in every encounter." He was flying to London to finally give the keynote address he had been forced to miss. This time, he wasn't just a passenger. He was flying on the airline he had reshaped, a silent observer checking in on his own creation. He approached the first-class boarding lane and handed his passport and ticket to the gate agent, a young man with a warm and genuine smile. The agent scanned his documents. "Welcome, Dr. Michael," the young man said, making eye contact. "We are honored to have you with us today. You're in Tuve. It's a window seat with an excellent view. Can I pre-board you now, or would you prefer to wait?" "I'm happy to wait," Aidan replied, a small smile touching his own lips. He watched as the agent handled the passengers. He saw him patiently explaining baggage policies to an anxious family, finding a better seat for an elderly woman with a bad knee, and wishing each person a safe and pleasant flight with what seemed like sincere warmth. This was the culture he had fought to build, one of quiet competence and genuine respect. When his turn came, he walked down the jet bridge and onto the aircraft. The flight attendant at the door greeted him by name and showed him to his seat. Seat Tuve. As he settled in, he looked out the window at the bustling tarmac. He thought about the journey he had taken, a journey that had started in this very spot with a moment of profound humiliation. He had channeled his anger not into destructive rage, but into a constructive, disciplined force for change. He hadn't just bought a company, he had forced it to confront its own reflection and become better. A flight attendant offered him a pre-departure glass of champagne. He accepted it, the cool crystal, a stark contrast to the burning anger he had felt 2 years ago. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Izzy Chen. "How's the view from the throne?" it read. Aidan looked around the serene, beautifully appointed cabin, at the attentive crew, at the other passengers settling in, feeling not a sense of ownership, but a sense of peace. He typed his reply. "The view is good, Izzy. But the real throne was never the CEO's chair or a seat on the board. It was this seat right here. And I'm happy to report it's finally available for everyone." As the plane pushed back from the gate and began its powerful ascent into the sky, Aidan leaned his head back. He hadn't just won a battle against an airline. He had proven that one person's dignity, when leveraged with intelligence, patience, and unwavering resolve, could be the most powerful force for change in the world. The case, which Apex Air had once so arrogantly considered closed, was now for him truly and finally settled. The story of Dr. Aidan Michael is a powerful testament to the idea that the best response to injustice is not always the loudest, but the most strategic. He transformed a moment of personal humiliation into a catalyst for systemic change, proving that true power isn't about shouting from the outside, but about methodically rebuilding from the inside. His journey reminds us that integrity, patience, and a refusal to accept disrespect can reshape even the most formidable corporate giants. This wasn't just karma, it was a masterclass in turning principle into power. If this story of calculated justice and corporate reckoning resonated with you, please help us share more like it. Hit that like button to let us know you're here. Share this video with someone who needs to see that the little guy can win. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next story of when karma hits back hard.